Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Just over a month ago, we stood together and had a discussion about gun violence and how the city, the SPD, the county, public health, and community partners were all stepping up to help save lives. I've been in daily discussions with the mayor on addressing this issue. At the event, I said shootings had to stop. No one there was under any illusion that a press conference or new investments in programs or significant arrests by police were going to end this ongoing epidemic overnight. I think we all hoped after the violent weekend in July, we could begin to turn a corner and that there were a few weeks where the violence seemed to be subsiding from their historic levels. But the unrelenting pace of the violence in recent days reminds us that this should be unacceptable. People need to put down their guns. Early this morning, a man was shot and killed in downtown Seattle. In this case, an armed robbery victim opened fire, apparently in self-defense, shooting and killing the armed suspect. This past weekend, we had multiple shooting instances with two individuals losing their lives as a result. So far, year to date, there have been over 100 additional shootings compared to the same time last year in 2020, and about 150 more than 2019. We've recovered over 2,000 gun casings. Last year, we recovered over 2,500 gun casings. We continue to see more victims being shot each year, 20 more incidents of victims. We're better than this. This community came together in the face of COVID-19 pandemic, and it is going to take an even greater community effort to push back on the relentless threat of violence. The community has a commitment that SPD will continue to work to create space and time for neighbors and leaders to safely be able to work to prevent additional violence. To do that, we must address who is doing the shooting now. We know from research that shooters and their associates quickly become victims. Stopping a shooting stops the cycle of violence. SPD officers are doing the dangerous and hard work of directly intervening and preventing future injury and loss of life. In just the past month, officers have arrested 24 individuals of gun-related offenses. So far this year, 14 individuals suspected to be involved in homicides have been arrested. Officers and detectives have taken about 100 guns off the street this month, putting us at 700 guns off the street so far this year. This is on pace for the fifth straight year of over 1,000 guns taken off the street. When officers arrive on scene of violence, they're not just pursuing suspects, they're saving lives. This year, they've applied 26 tourniquets in August alone. In August alone, we've had 8 additional times. 29 chest seals, 8 more in August alone. 47 combat gauges or pressure bandages, 9 more in August alone, and helped to stabilize many other victims until an ambulance could be on scene. We also know that the listed distribution of sales of drugs, including fentanyl, which has been involved in a record number of overdoses deaths this year, is directly tied to violence. Detectives and officers have seized over 500,000 fentanyl pills, 13 pounds of cocaine, 88 pounds of meth, and 25 pounds of heroin. Officers and professionals across this department have also continued to engage positively with young people through summer youth employment, the Police Activities League, and in partnership with King County Public Health and the community organizations like Regional Peacekeeper Collaborative. Working with our federal partners, we've served countless warrants, taken numerous guns off the street, and disrupted dangerous illicit trafficking networks across the region. I know these efforts have directly prevented shootings, but still too many have happened and continue to happen. SPD is committed to approaching this crisis in an evidence-based manner that focuses on community, analytics, prevention, environment, and enforcement. We know where the shootings are most likely to take place, and we know it's an extremely small number of people who are willing to pull a gun and use it. We know the types of locations that support the behaviors that lead to shootings. If the department was not in the midst of a staffing crisis, I would have highly visible officers in the neighborhoods suffering this violence, and we're doing everything we can to make this happen. There would be time to talk and connect with people with resources, and when disputes begin to bubble over, to intervene. I want to thank Councilmember Peterson for joining us today. He will speak in a few moments, but I cannot thank him enough for his advocacy to do all that we can to get more officers in the department and on the street. Without those officers, my options are extremely limited. He has been a steadfast partner for public safety, and I want to thank him for that. SPD officers on the street to save lives. We know that the widespread arrests do not make a neighborhood safer, but we and the rest of the justice system have to hold people accountable for engaging in violence and illegally carrying and using guns. We need the community to stand up with us, to denounce this violence. I and the police department and other city departments will stand with you. We need people to tell their friends and family that guns are not the answer. We need people to call 911 when they hear gunshots. We need people to talk to detectives when they know who has a gun or who is shooting at each other and helping to identify those suspects. We need the other parts of our community, like like those here with us today, to address the underlying issues that give rise to violence, and to be out in the community helping people see that there are other ways to resolve conflict. At the last briefing, we announced the launch of our new public-facing shots fired dashboard, another step in data transparency and accountability. Today, I'm committing to routine updates on gun violence. We shouldn't only talk about this after a tragic weekend. Every day, hours of new coverage is spent on COVID-19, and rightfully so. But we need to be talking about gun violence just as much. I would now turn it over to Seattle City Council member Alex Peterson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. And thanks to our city's human services team and the mayor's office for inviting me to participate this morning on such an important and sadly gut-wrenching public safety situation, one that calls for leadership, action, and collaboration. To address the serious spike in gun violence, I believe our city council needs to partner with both our police department and community nonprofits for a multi-pronged response with effective violence prevention programs. After 300 police officers have left city employment, which is a record-breaking amount of attrition, I also hope all council members crafting our city's mid-year budget recognize the reality of the police shortage crisis and work with Chief Diaz and the community to recruit and retain officers. I want to thank all our frontline workers for all the difficult work they have been doing for community safety. I believe increased recruitment and retention should include a focus on community policing officers who used to work with our neighborhoods and nonprofits to prevent crimes, and detectives who are trained to solve crimes, including this recent surge in deadly shootings. And so while I'm leveraging this opportunity to call on everyone at City Hall to work together to invest now in incentives to accelerate recruitment and retention of highly trained officers and detectives, I'm also pleased the Durkan administration continues to reimagine public safety by expanding the social service investments with our Human Services Department and community nonprofits. And so I'll turn it over now to Rex Brown of our Human Services Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Good morning. I'm Rex Brown, Director of the New Safe and Thriving Communities Division at the Human Services Department. The division was created in response to the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 and community advocacy efforts that urged the city to focus on Black, Indigenous, people of color communities and shift safety investments into community-based organizations. Safe and Thriving manages investments to reduce gender-based violence, to support crime survivors services, and increase community safety. HSD invests over $20 million in community-based organizations that work to increase community safety, which includes the July announcement of the investment of $10.4 million through the Community Safety Capacity Building Request for Proposal to build the capacity of 33 community-based organizations working toward community-led solutions to end violence and to increase safety. The community-led groups that receive funds from HSD offer a variety of services, including Community Safety Hub Model, which offers hotspot and critical incident response and wraparound services in South Seattle, West Seattle, and Central District. As of June, community organizations have responded to 39 critical incidents and convened 19 meetings to discuss systems coordination that included a Seattle Police Department liaison. Other programs include gun violence prevention, assistance with reentry after incarceration, and programs to prevent youth from entering the criminal justice system in the first place. In addition, the city is partnering with public health to invest $2 million in the King County Regional Peacekeepers Collective pilot program to address the steep rise in gun violence regionally. This investment will help build comprehensive support systems for young people at risk of gun violence and their families by adding restorative services such as family support specialists, youth and family support services, comprehensive training and technical assistance. Wraparound case management and family-centered engagement can help disrupt the cycle of gun violence and help young people on a path to health and well-being. The Regional Peacekeepers Collective is expected to serve more than 200 young people over the next 2 years. These are some of the investments from the Durkin administration through HSD, and I now turn it back over to our host.
Thank you, panelists. We're now going to open this up for the Q&A portion. As a reminder, please enter questions using the WebEx chat. I have 2 questions so far from Hannah Scott at Cairo Radio. As you are sending questions through the chat feature, please select from the Send To drop-down menu all panelists before sending. And please also include your news organization and your name. I will read the questions aloud. If your question is for a specific panelist, please also enter that information. And I'll begin the questions. The first question is from Hannah Scott from Cairo Radio. And the question is for Council Member Peterson. Most of your fellow council members are opposed to more staffing dollars going to SPD. How can the community help change this?
Thank you for the question. We have new information about the loss of officers, the attrition numbers. We have a surge in gun violence. We are hearing more and more from constituents about concerns with community safety. So I think that there's new information that council members can consider as we look at our mid-year budget. Also, it's not adding money to the budget. It's really just keeping the money that was already allocated, keeping that in the police department so that they can use that funding for recruitment and retention of highly trained officers.
Thank you, Council Member. The next question is also from Hannah Scott, and it's for Chief Diaz. Are your investigators getting any help from those who live in the communities where these shootings are happening? If not, can you tell us why you think that may be and what's being done to improve trust? Chief Diaz, you are muted.
Sorry about that. Great question. And it's kind of a mix. We are getting a lot of information from a lot of community members on solving some of these crimes. That's the reason why we have been able to make significant arrests in many of our homicides and some arrests in a variety of different, anything from robberies to some of the shootings. But we also know that there is a level of silence that does occur with some of the shooting victims. And that is one of the things that we are working to constantly build trust. We are, working with youth groups and trying to find ways to engage youth and interact and find positive ways to improve trust. But there is a level of hesitation for people reporting or providing information as fear of retaliation as well. So we are working to do that, to improve trust every day.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. Our next question is from Erica Barnett from Publicola. She mentions that many of the 10.4 million in grants that was recently announced through HSD were from one-time funds for mentorship programs for young people. Her question is, how would these programs have helped prevent the shootings that have happened recently in terms of the populations they're targeting? Put another way, did the city consider information about the victims and perpetrators of recent shootings beyond demographics like race when deciding which programs would do the most good? I believe that question would be for Rex.
Thank you. Great question. Many of the programs that receive funding from the Community Safety Capacity Building RFP are addressing risk factors at the societal and community level. These programs address root cause, not just symptoms for collective impact on to gun violence. What we have seen is really that the information from community-led organizations closest to the issue themselves. We're not just making it up. The city is really listening to the community as to how it would like to see improvements in safety.
Thank you, Director Brown. Next, we have a question from Omari Salisbury from Converge, and this is also for Chief Diaz. Do you think that the regional peacekeepers have enough support to be impactful, as impactful as possible, in not only keeping the peace, but also providing upstream and ecosystem work?
I think right now, and thank you, Omari, for that question. I think right now the program is kind of setting up and ramping up, providing training to their staff, and I think they're going to have to assess whether they need additional staff to do that work and find the right people to do that work. It is not an easy level of work because they're dealing with kids in trauma. And I think that there needs to have some time to ramp up and build those programs and create the sustainability factor in many of those programs. But I just don't know if they do have the exact resources and support to help that work continue.
Thank you, Chief. The next question is from Waranji Sinha, I believe from Cairo. Chief Diaz, over the weekend, SPD spokespersons said having more officers would be able to patrol and take more proactive stance when it comes to shootings and prevent them. Do you believe that to be the case? And how many more officers would you need?
We have listed out from the very beginning, we were around 1,400 officers up until the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. We have drastically dropped down the amount of officers that we have over the last year and a half. And I would say that we need that original amount of about 1,400 officers to really be able to not only staff patrol and then take a proactive stance and also be able to engage community. We are finding ourselves spending our patrol officers are spending more than roughly about 60 to 65% of their time just responding to 911 calls. And that really limits the amount of time that they can be engaging community and taking a proactive, developing relationships. And so we really need to make sure that we've got that full staffing of about 1,400 to be able to be more proactive in addressing the gun violence. And I believe that, when we had, as I mentioned before, we had 150 more shootings than we had in 2019. And so that is a very big number to see an amount of officers that we've lost. And we're still recovering a lot of guns. I mean, we've recovered over 700 guns. We're on pace for over 1,000. So officers are going out trying to do their best to ensure public safety, but needing more officers is going to be more impactful.
Thank you, Chief. And the next question, also for you, Chief, from Tracy Record of West Seattle Blog. The question is, sorry, I scrolled a little bit. Here we go. Can you please break out the shootings total number into numbers of fatal, injury, and non-injury?
Yeah, so we've had right now, as I mentioned, over 380 shootings or shots fired. We've had over 100 incidences of victims. So we've had 135 total victims, but about 104 total incidences that had victims. So you have an incident that has multiple victims, and then what we also have, the rest of those are so over about 280 or 278 or so are where we don't have any injury at all as far as shootings. And so when we actually look at the amount of fatal injuries that are resulting to gun violence, we're looking about close to about 78% of those instances of fatal of homicides are resulting in some level of gun violence. Right now, this year, we had 35 homicides to date. Two of those are what we call delayed deaths. So the incident occurred the year before or another year, and then the victim died in this year. So, but we are experiencing already the same number of homicides that we were at last year at this same time, but we've had 100 more additional shootings to date than we had last year.
Thank you, Chief. This next question is from Kevin Schofield from SCC Insight. And he comments that these investments that are being discussed today are not new investments. They've been discussed and discussions over the funding, the staffing prices, and long-term HSD investments. But what new things are you doing that the public should expect that will change the amount of gun violence over the next 2 months? That's a question for anyone to take.
Well, I'll take part of that. And I think that while many of the things that the investments that we have been discussed before, they have not necessarily been implemented before. Specifically with regard to urban family training and implementation, providing training, grounding, and ongoing support for hotspot and critical incident deployment and response teams. That's something that's quite innovative. Monthly community engagement trainings that include hotspot and critical incident staff from all 3 hubs that we have in operation. I think we sometimes become accustomed to perhaps a rapid change as opposed to an effective change. And right now, the community is asking for problems to be solved in an effective way, not just quickly. So our deliberate speed is yielding some of those promising outcomes. And we'll see more of that once our groups convene and implement more of the awards we have from the recent Community Safety Capacity Building RFP. As to the specifics of the 2 months, there are individual community-based organizations we are engaging for short-term effective response as well, and more on that to come. So just a sneak peek for that. But I'll pivot perhaps to Chief Diaz if you would like to add anything to that from a public safety perspective.
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, our next question is for Councilmember Peterson. And this is also from Omari Salisbury from Converge. And his question is about why do you think that council has been, or the rest of council rather, has been as quiet on the issue of gun violence in the city? And then additionally, how closely are your council colleagues working with the rest of city government to address gun violence?
Thank you for the question, Omari. I think that all the city council members are very concerned about whenever there's a surge in violence. They all care about this, and I think that they are, we will be taking action on September 13th for the mid-year budget so that we can decide how to best allocate dollars for public safety. I hope to see more of the funds going toward recruiting and retaining officers. I think that there is work going on with parts of city government. I think that we want to also work collaboratively with our police department so that we let the frontline workers know that we care about them. We want them to stay with the department so that we can have enough staffing. And so I think we'll see more in the middle of next month in terms of where we want to allocate those dollars. But in the meantime, to be supportive of all our frontline workers.
Thank you, Council Member. Our next question is from Steve Kiggins with KCPQ, and it's for Chief Diaz. We know that Pierce County is employing booking restrictions at county jail due to COVID, meaning that only the most severe cases are typically being entered into jail. Is that an issue you're seeing in King County?
We've continued to have COVID restrictions on who we book into jail, and that has continued since the part of the start of the pandemic. Right now, we know that people are getting a lot more vaccinated, and so we are seeing some of those ways that we can book for certain incidences be relieved. But right now, we still are on some of the COVID restrictions for booking restrictions.
And Chief, this is also for you from Hannah Scott at Tyro Radio. Can you elaborate on the impact COVID is having on the number of officers the department has active? Is there any data on the impact them not being on the job is having on 911 response times?
No, during last year, because of the COVID protocol, when somebody was potentially exposed to somebody that had COVID, we had, at probably our height, we had 80 officers at one given time that were out just honoring the COVID protocol, not even COVID cases, but just honoring the COVID protocol. Right now, we do have a significant impact of officers, but we're much less than our highest amounts of over the year. So we do take those into account on our responses, but we are making sure that we are providing emphasis in areas that are focused of these hotspots. So when you're looking at Pioneer Square and the Capitol Hill and the CID and Rainier and all these areas where we've seen a significant number of shootings, we're making sure that we have officers that are in those areas and a visible presence. We've had to do task force call out, so we've had to take some of our patrol resources and at around 10 o'clock at night on Friday and Saturday nights, move them to those hot spots and making sure that they're playing a visible presence. And for weeks we saw the number of shootings and shots fired be drastically reduced. This last weekend we saw it spike for Friday night, but one of the cases that resulted in several arrests we had that occurred right out of the Trinity nightclub where shots were fired. Officers were, heard the incident, were able to see the vehicle, stop the vehicle, and make several arrests out of that and recover several guns. So we are making sure that we're trying to be a visible presence, even with all of the vaccination or the COVID issues that we're experiencing.
Thank you, Chief. And this next question is for Council Member Peterson from Erica Barnett from Publicola. Police union leadership has suggested that the vaccine mandate will lead to massive attrition. Do you oppose the mandate for SPD officers or in general? And how would you like to see this issue resolved?
Thank you for that question. I support the vaccine mandate. I think that we now have, and there's some new things that have happened, right? We have FDA approval of the vaccine. And so that should give folks who are hesitating, that should give them more confidence. I've been fully vaccinated for months. I hope that all of our officers get fully vaccinated. I know many are. And I know that they're in the job because they care about the community and this is part of joining together as a community to show that we care is all getting vaccinated to keep everybody safe, especially those who are most vulnerable. So I'm hopeful that because of the FDA approval, that will help. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. And this will be our final question. And it is from Kara Costanich from Como TV, and it's for Chief Diaz. What is the one thing SPD needs right now that would allow neighbors to feel safer and show public safety is being made a priority?
And I'm going to add two. I'll make it two things. The first thing is we are making sure that we're a visible presence and that we are providing public safety and addressing all of the issues that are going on regarding to gun violence and violence in very specific areas during the specific times that it's occurring. And we're going to continue to do that. And the second portion is that we really need a lot of, the investments that we're continuing to do and interventions and many of the things that are occurring. We're not just seeing an increase in gun violence among youth. We're seeing an increase in gun violence in our homeless encampments. We're seeing an increase in road rages and gun incidents. And so we need investments in mental health. We need investments in a variety of different areas that aren't just necessarily where police can take that visible presence, because we're seeing those drive-by shootings and not necessarily youth or gang-related type shootings. So I think that it really is two things. We have to make sure that we're providing and we have the amount of officers that is needed to provide public safety across the whole city. But we also need to make sure that we're continuing those long-term efforts to prevent those future levels of violence.
Thank you, Chief. And with that, we'll be ending today's media availability. If we did not address your question, please do feel free to send that over to either myself, Kamaria Hightower, or Amy Clancy at SPD, or Lily Rareman at HSD. And all of our email addresses are included in today's media advisory. But feel free just to reach out to me, and of course I will filter it down through the departments. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.